The room held its breath. More than 1,000 of the world's most powerful executives, bankers, and politicians had queued for over an hour to witness what would become the most consequential speech at the World Economic Forum in years. Apple's Tim Cook sat near the European Central Bank president. The head of the World Bank exchanged greetings with finance ministers. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney found his seat, knowing he would soon be singled out by name. And somewhere in that packed Congress hall in Davos, French President Emmanuel Macron waited, wearing dark aviator sunglasses to protect an eye condition he had publicly dismissed as completely harmless. What followed over the next 70 minutes was not merely a speech. It was a systematic dismantling of the assumptions that have governed transatlantic relations for 8 decades. Trump opened with familiar territory, touting American economic performance, attacking Democrats, claiming credit for declining inflation and surging productivity. The audience of global elites listened politely. They had heard this before. But then the president pivoted, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from anticipation to something closer to alarm. He turned first to Macron. The French president had delivered his own address the previous day, warning of a shift toward a world without rules, where international law is trampled underfoot, and where the only law that seems to matter is that of the strongest. Macron had called out bullies without naming Trump directly. He had declared the endless accumulation of tariffs fundamentally unacceptable, especially when used as leverage against territorial sovereignty. Trump's response was characteristically direct. He noted that he had watched Macron yesterday with those beautiful sunglasses. Then came the line that drew nervous laughter from the assembled executives. What the hell happened? The question hung in the air. A sitting American president mocking the appearance of a major European ally at the world's premier economic gathering. Some in the audience laughed. Others shifted uncomfortably. The French president, according to observers, maintained his composure. But Trump was not finished with Macron. He pivoted to pharmaceutical pricing, recounting a phone call with the French leader about drug costs. The subtext was clear. America had been paying inflated prices, while European countries paid far less for the same medications. Trump claimed he had secured agreement from pharmaceutical companies to address the disparity, and that he had personally called Macron to demand compliance. The anecdote positioned the French president not as an equal partner in negotiation, but as someone who would be told what to do and expected to agree. The treatment of Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney proved even more pointed. Carney had delivered what many observers described as a historic address the previous day. He had declared bluntly that the old order is not coming back, and urged middle powers not to mourn it. Nostalgia is not a strategy. He described the current moment as a rupture, not a transition. Great powers, he said, had begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion. Carney had not named Trump directly. He did not need to. Everyone in Davos understood exactly who he meant. Trump understood too. During his own address, he turned to face Carney directly. Canada lives because of the United States, he said. Remember that, Mark, the next time you make your statements. The American president had just publicly dressed down the leader of America's closest ally by his first name in front of the global business establishment for having the audacity to suggest that the rules-based international order was collapsing. According to a CEO seated near Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister smiled and nodded along. Whether this reflected genuine amusement or the careful composure required of a leader whose country remains under threat of American tariffs and territorial annexation remained unclear. What was clear was the power dynamic Trump intended to establish. Middle powers could speak. The great power would respond by reminding them of their dependence. The assault on European values extended beyond individual leaders. Trump declared that certain places in Europe are not recognizable anymore. Friends come back from different places and say they do not recognize it, and that is not in a positive way. He attacked what he characterized as the conventional wisdom in Washington and European capitals that the only way to grow a modern Western economy was through ever-increasing government spending, unchecked mass migration, and endless foreign imports. The critique landed on an audience that included some of the architects of precisely those policies. European central bank officials sat feet away as the American president dismissed their economic philosophy as destructive. Immigration ministers from nations struggling with migration flows heard their approaches described as evidence of civilizational decline. The message was unmistakable. Europe had taken a wrong turn. America under Trump represented the correction. Then came Greenland. Trump asked the audience if they would like him to talk about the Arctic territory. A loud affirmation came from the crowd. Around the room, some attendees shook their heads. One Danish observer muttered that this is ridiculous, but Trump proceeded anyway, and what followed constituted perhaps the most extraordinary territorial demand made by an American president in the modern era. He announced he was seeking immediate negotiations to discuss the acquisition of Greenland by the United States. He framed the demand in terms of national security, arguing that no nation or group of nations is in any position to be able to secure Greenland other than the United States. He invoked World War II, noting that Denmark fell to Germany after just 6 hours of fighting and was unable to defend either itself or Greenland. The implication was clear. Denmark remained incapable of protecting the territory. America could. Therefore, America should own it. The president acknowledged that he probably would not get anything unless he decided to use excessive strength and force, where the United States would be frankly unstoppable. He paused. Then he added what he described as probably the biggest statement of his speech. He would not use force. People thought he would, but he did not want to, and he would not. Markets rallied on the statement. European officials expressed cautious relief. But the underlying logic remained extraordinary. An American president had just explained to a room full of world leaders that he could take territory from a NATO ally by force if he chose, but had graciously decided against it. The framing positioned restraint as generosity rather than adherence to international law. Trump offered Denmark a choice. They could say yes, and America would be very appreciative. Or they could say no, and America would remember. The threat was not subtle. European nations watching their ally threatened with consequences for refusing to surrender territory understood exactly what this meant for the broader alliance. The speech touched briefly on Venezuela, where American forces had extracted President Nicolás Maduro earlier this month in an operation that shocked the international community. Trump referenced the raid as evidence of American power projection capability. "I think they found that out 2 weeks ago in Venezuela," he said. The connection to Greenland was implicit but unmistakable. America had demonstrated its willingness to use military force to achieve objectives. The restraint on Greenland was a choice that could be reconsidered. Throughout the address, Trump confused Iceland with Greenland multiple times. At one point, he complained that NATO allies were not there for the United States on Iceland. He mentioned that the stock market had taken its first dip because of Iceland. The sovereign nation of Iceland is not the territory Trump seeks to acquire. The repeated confusion between a NATO member state and a Danish territory raised questions about the precision of American policy planning that went unaddressed. The response from European leaders following the speech revealed a continent grappling with an alliance partner that no longer behaves like one. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever captured the mood during a panel discussion. "Until now, we tried to appease the new president," he said. But now so many red lines have been crossed that you have to choose your self-respect. Being a happy vassal is one thing. The European Parliament halted work on implementing a trade deal reached with the previous Trump administration after his tariff threats. Bernd Lange, chairman of the Parliament's International Trade Committee, announced the suspension, citing sovereignty and territorial integrity concerns. "Business as usual impossible," he wrote. Hours after the speech, Trump announced on Truth Social that he had reached a framework for a future deal on Greenland and the entire Arctic region with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Based on this understanding, he declared, he would not impose the tariffs scheduled to take effect on February 1st. The tariffs had been set to start at 10% on goods from 8 European nations, rising to 25% by June. What exactly this framework entails remains unclear. Trump provided no details. Rutte had urged thoughtful diplomacy in his own remarks, while acknowledging tensions within the alliance. Whether a genuine agreement exists, or whether the announcement served primarily to claim victory and de-escalate a crisis Trump himself had created, will become apparent in the weeks ahead. The World Economic Forum traditionally functions as a space where global leaders affirm their commitment to cooperation, open markets, and rules-based governance. This year, the American president used it to mock allied leaders by name, threaten territorial acquisition, disparage European civilization, and extract concessions through tariff threats. The audience, packed with executives who depend on stable international relations for their business operations, watched one of those relations destabilize in real time. As attendees filed out after more than an hour of remarks, reactions varied. One tech CEO admitted he was not sure whether to laugh or feel nervous. A politician acknowledged that, yes, they laughed, but it was also frightening to think he might actually try to execute some of this. The nervous laughter that punctuated Trump's provocations throughout the speech reflected an elite class uncertain how to respond to an American president who treats international forums as opportunities for dominance displays rather than consensus building. Carney departed Davos without meeting Trump. Before leaving, he met with Rutte to reaffirm mutual commitment to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Denmark, including Greenland. The Canadian statement announced reinforced Arctic security measures. The message was clear. Middle powers intended to coordinate, even if coordination meant standing against their largest ally. Macron has refused to join Trump's newly announced Board of Peace, a body created as part of the president's plan to address the Israel-Hamas conflict. The board requires a $1 billion payment for permanent membership and designates Trump as permanent chair even after he leaves office. It positions itself as a potential rival to the United Nations. The French refusal signals that European accommodation has limits. The questions that hung over Davos as the forum continued were not about specific policies. They concerned something more fundamental. What happens when the guarantor of the international order becomes its most aggressive disruptor? What do middle powers do when great powers openly use economic coercion as a tool of territorial expansion? How do alliances function when one member threatens the others with consequences for defending their sovereignty? The speech provided no answers. It provided only clarity about the questions.